Hello and welcome. This is From Day One. Welcome to our webinar, in which we'll be exploring a pressing topic, the burnout factor, new insights for stressful times. Overwork and workplace stress were already on the rise before the pandemic, before protests over racial injustice, but remote work and economic fallout threatened to aggravate the crisis. There are few boundaries left between work and home responsibilities, and we may be asking too much of our workers without even realizing it. So how do we recognize the causes and symptoms of burnout? How do we take action proactively to ensure that our employees are feeling their best, physically, emotionally, or otherwise? Before we dive into this topic, I want to thank our partners, Bravely and EasyExitInterview.com. I'm going to tell you a little bit about each one. Bravely connects your people to on-demand confidential coaching in the moments that define the employee experience. Access to Bravely's network of vetted professional coaches fosters employee well-being and development to supercharge performance and help people thrive at work. When leading organizations offer Bravely to everyone, they scale the support offered by their people teams, and they transform their cultures in an evolving world of work. EasyExitInterview.com is an automated exit interview tool. It uses text messages and email to provide every former employee with a chance to participate. Responses are automatically aggregated into meaningful reports. If you want to know why your employees are leaving, ask them. It's easy. Now, a few quick logistical items. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on demand within 24 hours after the event. Look out for an email in about 24 hours with that link. That email will also have info on SHRM or SHRM credit for the session. And look out for a written account of the conversation next week on our website. That's fromday1.co, FROMDAYONE.co. Around 1 hour from now, that's 3 p.m. on the East Coast, we will have a Q&A session. You can submit your questions anytime using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. You can start now if you'd like. So now I'd like to introduce our moderator, business journalist, Lydia Dishman. She reports and edits for Fast Company on topics including tech and leadership, has also written for CBS Money Watch, Fortune, the New York Times, and many, many others. Lydia, thanks, and over to you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Nick, and thank you all for being with us today, my panelists and audience. I can't see you all, but I know you're there, and I am very grateful that you chose to spend an hour and a half with us to discuss a very timely topic, which I'm sure everyone is feeling possibly a little bit of, given the uncertainty and the news cycle, which is relentless these days. As Nick said, I am a reporter and editor for Fast Company, and I cover workplace issues. And I have never quite experienced this in my 20+ years of being a reporter. And I'm sure that I'm not alone in this. But I did, because I am a reporter, I geek out on stats. And I did come across a very interesting stat just this morning. Gallup has released some survey results and found that 76% of employees, and this was even before the pandemic, have experienced burnout in some form or fashion. And it is not necessarily burnout tied to the number of hours worked, but rather how you're managed and how you experience work during those hours. Some of the factors that correlated most highly with burnout in that study included unfair treatment at work and things like unmanageable workload and unclear communication from managers. So with that in mind, we're going to talk about all of these topics and how each of these organizations is talking to their employees and finding out where they are and checking on engagement and health and well-being. So without further ado, I'd like each of you to introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about how your work has changed since the pandemic started, and especially now that this new introduction of the fight for racial justice is also causing definite rumblings around what corporations are doing and what the conversations are in the workplace. So Alex, why don't you start us off?
Absolutely, and thanks, Lydia. So I would say first on a personal level, and I can't speak for my other panelists, but for me, And I know many people on the call are also HR professionals. This is sort of uncharted territory that we're experiencing. And I definitely want to be clear that I, nor Control Risks, have all the answers. We've been figuring it out as we go along, right? And I think anyone that ascribes to saying they have all the answers is lying, frankly, because you have to very much pivot on a dime right now. And I would say, while there are certain strategies that we've implemented, we also pivot depending on what's going on with our employees. On a personal level, I can tell you I have experienced some burnout during this period. And I think just to give a sort of personal story, I'm dating somebody right now. And for us, you know, fitness is really important. And we realized as we went into quarantine, we're like, well, you can go to a bar and you can go to a restaurant. So there's really no excuse to not focus on fitness right now, right? So I have lost 15 pounds since this quarantine. I've switched my diet. I just got some great cholesterol test results. So winning from that perspective. But my sort of goal was like, I need to get something positive out of a very tough experience. And my recommendation to everyone is, obviously it doesn't need to be fitness, but whatever motivates you, what gets you excited, focus on that during this period, because then it doesn't feel like this has been all in vain, right? And this has just been sort of really, you know, a tough experience all around. I also think what I'm most concerned about from just a personal company perspective is we're only in June and everyone is just so exhausted. So day in, day out, I ask the question of how are we going to get to December, right? We're only halfway through the year. And I think in a normal year, it would be tough to deal with just a recession. Then you layer on a pandemic, then you layer on racial injustice issues. We just had a huge earthquake in our Mexico office this morning. I mean, it's just, the question becomes how much can people take, right? So I think that's where the uncharted territory piece comes in. I think some of the things that we have done, just so everyone knows, is we've reminded people to focus on self-care, which I think everyone has really done. We've reminded people to take space. So you talk about racial injustice issues. We just decided to observe Juneteenth in the US last week, and we told employees to really reflect and take space, do whatever makes sense to them, right? It's personal in nature, right? The other thing is it's Pride Month. So some of the other things that we're doing is focusing, I'm in the process of creating a conversation around intersectionality, right? Pride is nothing if it's not intersectional, right? At this particular juncture, we should be talking about race and sexuality and sort of the intersection between two, as well as other things. I think some of the other things that we have really been done is we created a crisis management team that meets on a weekly basis. So we talk about everything from people issues to operational issues to communication issues, and we're constantly getting in front of our community as well. The other thing I worry about is mental health, right? So the nature of what our company does for a living is things around crisis management and global risk consulting. So we deal with really tough matters and tough clients on a day-to-day basis, and we see really tough things. So I worry about our mental health. The good news is, going into COVID, in the US at least, we provided 100% mental health coverage to our employees, which frankly, I've worked in a range of different industries. I've never had that kind of coverage. So I'm glad we're sort of a market leader from that perspective. And we just instituted mental health benefits in Mexico coming out of a health emergency, which for those of you that know the Latin American market a little more, that is fairly taboo. So we're trying to be market leading on that front. So I'm really happy with what we're doing from that front. And I'm starting to see my role less as just a head of HR for the region and really as sort of a chief health and wellness officer too, because I think that's going to be part of all of our roles moving forward as well. The other thing I think is really unique about us is we have threat management capabilities. So one of the things we provide to our external clients is things around helping triage, assess, and dealing with concerning behaviors in the workplace, right? And so the fact that we have that in-house, we can tap into those people and those capabilities right now, which I think is really, really special and unique for us. And also, I hate to say it, it's a bit of a shameless plug, because if any of you out there need those capabilities, we provide them. So I always say, if you're a good HR person, you're also a good salesperson. You know, I think those are some of the things we've really been focused in on. And I don't think we've taken anything for granted right now. And like I said, we're just not taking a cookie cutter approach to that. So I think those are some of the sort of broad brushstrokes. And the other thing I would say is flexibility. I know that some companies pre this we're still very much FaceTime cultures. That wasn't us. We operate a regional business. People are constantly traveling, they're consultants. So the ability to pivot working from home full time was less hard. From an infrastructure perspective, it was a little more tricky. But in terms of actually doing it, it was less hard. And I just think that continuing to double down our efforts on all these fronts is just going to continue to make us feel connected, our employees, and just engage.
Thank you, Alex. Good context for starting this discussion. Katasha, why don't you take it next? Tell us a little bit about how your work has changed and what you're doing personally that's changed.
Sure, thank you, Lydia. So I will start by saying, it's important to note at the New York Times, we first published or reported about this mysterious pneumonia-like illness on January 6th. And so when I think about burnout, right, we've been in it for some time now in terms of our coverage on the coronavirus pandemic. Then when you add on to, some of the things that Alex talked about, the injustice that's happening right now and our coverage on that, folks internally are tired and exhausted, but at the same time, motivated to be a part of the change, right, that we need for a society. So in terms of how my work has personally changed, and the work that I do at the Times, which is essentially managing, in terms of talent development, I manage employee life cycle, if you will. And I think every day we're trying to figure out what point of the life cycle are employees at. I am the poster child of I would say, employee burnout. So showing up, wanting to actively engage in how to support our employees. So we've done stand-up work in terms of self-care. We've put that first and foremost for most of our employees, for all of our employees, but especially for journalists, where, we liken this to when we cover war zones, like coverage like that, we're putting them out there, and we have trained psychologists on staff, in addition to, not on staff, but we consult with, in addition to EAP resources, et cetera, that we provide to employees. I personally, after 2 weeks, and I'm a single mom by choice. So after 2 weeks of being in an apartment with 2 children and limited childcare, I made the decision to get in a car, drive 17 hours by myself to the closest family members that could help provide some support. And for me, there were a couple of things that occurred. So one, it was thinking of this house 17 hours away, like water in the desert, right? Like I just had to get there. And being in New York City at the peak was really tough with small children. At the same time, it was a vulnerability that I had to just say, I'm going to show up and expose myself to my team and to folks that are reaching out to me. So just as I am supporting employees of the Times, I am also adjusting and pivoting. I had to deal with stereotypes that I consider when you think about single Black women, and people not necessarily knowing that I'm a single mom by choice, and people then being exposed to my lifestyle and things that I need to do. And so I decided to just show up, expose that, allow employees to expose themselves, right? And so on a day-to-day basis, we stood up tons of resources around learning and development, tons of resources around self-care, especially right now with what's happening. We're increasing our position on inclusion training. So we've consistently for years have conducted unconscious bias training. We're doing more around belonging. We've partnered with some of you on this call, like Bravely, in exposing employees to racial injustice and what their roles are in tackling those issues. We had a session yesterday on myth-busting perceptions of Black males. We're still covering the pandemic and the spike in it now, and so there's a lot going on and a lot of support, and it starts with self-care and then making sure that our policies support employees for what they need right now. And I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit later, but that's a little bit about me and the work that I've been doing.
Thank you, Katasha. Allison, why don't you take it next? Just take a couple of minutes and tell us how things have shifted for you.
Great. Thank you. I'm Allison Green. I head diversity and inclusion as well as culture and engagement for Lincoln Financial Group. And being in the financial services industry, as we know, as Alex mentioned earlier, the ups and downs financially, we're not immune to. But what I am really proud of with the work around culture and engagement to start with, we went from over a weekend from 1,500 employees who typically worked from home or remote to well over 11,000 shifting to being at home. So one of the first things we did our first week at home was we sent out a survey. I call it an employee engagement survey to all employees with like 19 questions around productivity, work from home, what do you need? 2 weeks later, we sent one out regarding our response to the coronavirus. And since then, every Friday, we call it Feedback Fridays, we send a few questions out for employees to tell us how they're doing and what their experience is like. So those questions have ranged from, we were noticing people weren't taking time off. So why aren't you taking time off? We found that people were saying, we don't have anywhere to go. You know, I don't want to use my vacation because I'm at home. We just announced we're going to be out for at least until October. So we have campaigns on, please take your time. We also asked about burnout and why. And a lot of it is around what we term Blur's Day. Things just run from one day to another. And how do you make that distinction so that repetitive nature of things can also lead to burnout. But we also have heard about childcare and what we've done to address that. We've leveraged our EAP quite a bit to help with that. We've instituted emergency leave policies. We're just proposed maybe having a block of time each day that you block out, no meetings, no calls, just that time. Encouraging people really take a lunch, take time. Health and wellness, we've really ramped up for employees to take advantage of. Haven't seen as much communication as we're doing now to encourage folks. We even took a moment to create what's called a culture video as well. So even though we're not in our office, here's, remember what it looks and feels like to be a part of a bigger culture outside of at home with your family. So one thing I've done personally at work, which has worked out really well, is have daily huddles with my team for 30 minutes every day. We just check in and do personal and professional check-in. We probably see each other now more than we would have in the office, and took the time to have a team building sessions, I guess. So that's kind of brought us together. We've clarified kind of roles and responsibilities because we're doing very different things, both the culture side as well as the diversity side. And
I want to get into that a little bit more in depth later. So
okay.
if you don't mind, that's a really good point, and I don't want to give it all away in the first 5 minutes.
Okay.
So thank you.
You're welcome.
Annalisa, do you want to go next?
Yeah, with pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, and it's an honor to be with such talented co-panelists. I'm coming at this from the public relations side of things. The area that I manage, in addition to employee engagement, is also corporate communication strategy, as well as how our C-suite engages with employees and external audiences from investors on through media. So from where we sit, a lot of the work that has enabled us to really capitalize and position Mary Barra, our senior executive, as someone who is listening, engaged, and making solid, sound choices has to do with work that we started 4 or 5 years ago on recognizing emotional intelligence as a key driver for leadership and bringing that skill set, specific skill set, on down through the entire leadership suite. Because in this stage where there's so much at stake, there's so much ambiguity, nobody's clear when they're coming back to work. How do I wear a mask? Will my glasses fog? Am I truly safe? Like, we're talking about psychological security as well as physical security. And a lot of that is incumbent as to whether or not you trust the leader that's immediately in front of you, whether or not you trust the leader that's immediately in front of them. And so much of that is contingent on that emotional intelligence capability, as well as the ability for that leader to show vulnerability, to show, I may not know the answers, I may not know, but you can trust that I am with you. You can trust that I am thoughtful and that I have your interest and the business's best interest in mind. And that's not something you start overnight. That's not credibility that you build overnight. That is incremental steps over time, shown over and over and over again. And then on the flip side of that, from a PR perspective, we did a tremendous amount of recalibration when COVID hit, and now in the current conversations about Black Lives Matter, as well as inequality, injustice, and other areas where we need to be present as a large global employer and just as good humans, right? Our content shifted almost overnight to on-demand, hyper-focused, very clear spoken, no corporate speak whatsoever, high authenticity. And I feel like those choices made early on that enabled us to capitalize when the time called for us to activate in a crisis. We had the right tools and the right research and the right perspective to do so. But again, that all came from steps made prior that we could then activate and amplify and kind of act as a convening authority across the enterprise to make sure that our leaders were authentic, they were visible, they were vocal, and that they also were speaking in a way that sounded like them. So that way you could trust that what you were hearing was the truth. And I think when we look through the data, that is time and time again the area where we know that leaders rise and that their organizations follow and feel that they're safe, is when they believe that person. And so much of what we do, what my team does, is focused on that.
Such a good point. Such a good point. Trust is so key right now.
Mm-hmm.
Anna, you want to take it briefly, introduce yourself and tell us how things have shifted for your organization?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm also just feeling super honored to be part of this conversation. I lead people strategy and people programs at Pinterest. And I can't even begin to tell you the number of ways that my work has shifted. And there's a lot that I could share about kind of our crisis response, empowering remote work, focusing on employee well-being. And I think we'll get to that later in the conversation. I think the most important shift that we have made as a company is when I joined back in January, everything I heard about our culture was how nice everybody was, and it was such a happy place, and it was the safe corner of the internet, which I still very much believe. I think we've had a really hard and harsh awakening as a company over the last few weeks, where we've realized that there have been people hurting whose voices have not been heard. I think our nice culture has made it difficult to have the hard conversations that you need to in order to truly build a healthy culture. And so right now we're focusing on really empowering hard conversations, giving people the strength to say the hard thing. And that's starting first and foremost at the leadership level. So our most senior leaders in the company are spending almost 100% of their time right now listening to employees, meeting with employee resource groups, and really finding out how people are feeling, so we can build a really, really thoughtful and informed kind of cultural action plan that's deliberately anti-racist, that's deeply diverse and inclusive, and kind of that focuses on building a strong company for the long term that goes far beyond being nice.
That's very important too.
Yeah.
And we will definitely take a little bit deeper on this again. And then I want to get to Sarah, who hasn't had a chance to introduce herself yet. So take it away.
Thank you everyone for joining us. I'm Sarah Sheehan, one of the co-founders of Bravely. You talked a little bit at the top about what Bravely does, and so we provide professional coaching to employees. We work with the New York Times and Pinterest and Alex, so it's great to have some of our clients here. But I can tell you, it's kind of like twofold for us, because we support tens of thousands of employees with our platform, and then we also have our own team, right? And so we've seen on the client side a huge spike. I think we're close to a 300% increase in sessions around stress, burnout, anxiety. I mean, these are things that we always coach people on, but right now, as you can imagine, the sessions that we're seeing are through the roof. And so we've gone through this evolution, pandemic, economic crisis, and now obviously everything that's happening post murder of George Floyd that is really setting the stage to increased levels of burnout. On our team alone, we were based in New York City when COVID hit. It was the epicenter, tons of anxiety. I would say most of our employees are still in that lockdown stage and have personal circumstances that make it incredibly difficult for different reasons. I can tell you how our work has changed in terms of just everything shifted overnight. And I know this is true for many companies. Our focus, the plans that we had put together, incredibly difficult for employees to deal with on top of all of the other personal stressors that we have. For me personally, I was a new mother back to work for 5 days before we decided to go back to working from home. And so it was navigating this new normal. We've had family members that were impacted by COVID, which was incredibly sad and stressful. My partner had to take a pay cut. So we've been impacted by the economic crisis. And he also happens to be a Black man. And so we've kind of been hit threefold with each of these things that have happened. But what it's done for me is opened my eyes and helped us, my entire team is doing this collectively, but I have been able to think about how we support employees through these new lenses that I've experienced personally. And then also just have a ton of empathy for the people that work for me as well.
Thank you. Okay, so now that everybody knows who everybody is, I need to briefly turn it back over to Nick for station identification, since we're at the 30-minute mark.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Just wanted to remind everyone joining our webinar in midstream that this is from day one, and today we're exploring the Burnout Factor, new insights for stressful times. Our sponsors today are Bravely and EasyExitInterview.com. As a reminder, you can submit your questions at any time, including right now if you'd like, and we will answer as many as we can during the Q&A session, which starts in about 30 minutes. Now back to you, Lydia.
Thank you. So I want to drill down into the specifics. And Allison, you were starting to go there, and I apologize for cutting you off there, but I'm going to take it back to you and say, I want you to tell us a little bit about what your employees are expressing the most concern about in terms of health and well-being. Are they coming up with saying that they're having trouble managing stress or work-life balance or something else? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, all of those. Specifically childcare and elder care, balancing the work. So at first we heard it was great, no commute. Now that time is when does work start and when does work end? And managing, feeling like, I would say the biggest piece is, if I do take time off, how do I catch up when I get back to work? So we're talking about how that can happen, and going back out to employees and or managers, because people are saying, I don't want to be left out, but I do need a break. So how do we help them navigate that? I would say specifically as it relates to employees being tired, given the recent conversations, experiences, and or for many of us, lifetime experiences around racial injustice. We've held open forum platforms for employees to call in, and we call them meaningful conversations around race. So we've done that for all employees. Specifically in the African American population, we've hosted sessions there. We've also done an all town hall, and each leadership team is doing extended leadership conversations. And one thing that our African American employees who have participated have overwhelmingly said, thank you for the platform. Not only do we appreciate being able to talk about it, but have people ask, how am I doing? What do we need to help? And we've provided resources to help facilitate more conversations and for people to have conversations amongst each other. One thing I'm really proud of is we're trying to decide how we want to respond to racial injustice. So that has been a leadership calling, and our leaders, with the feedback of our employees, are saying, here's what we want to do within our business model. So yes, we'll donate, but what can we do to change the way in which we do business to make sure we're inclusive?
So important. Katasha, you had mentioned the war zone metaphor, and being a reporter myself, but never having been in a war zone, I kind of feel that a little bit, the way the news cycle has been. So what are the employees at the Times talking about in terms of what is coming up as the biggest concern for them?
There are a few things that they're talking about, and we're getting information in a variety of ways. So whether that's through our talent and inclusion partners, otherwise known in other organizations as HR business partners, reaching out consistently, regularly to employees and leaders in the organization. We have done an employee perspective survey to understand globally what the experiences are and the support that we're providing, how employees are responding to that. And then it's just through holding leaders accountable to make sure they are checking in. So whether it's about how folks have adjusted to remote work, we literally just yesterday announced that we will continue to be in this remote working space for the foreseeable future. For those that haven't returned to the office and not considered essential to be in the office, that'll be at least until January 2021. So now it's like a new reality sinking in where, okay, 3 months have gone by, we're dealing with it for 3 months, but now you fast track and employees are processing, what this means to continue for this period of time. So to support, again, I referenced some of the self-care resources that we offer. So it isn't only, recommending employee assistance programs or reaching out to folks that we have contracted with. It's also, we do a daily meditation that anyone can participate in. There are yoga sessions that we run on a weekly basis. And so whatever you want to kind of create for your space, there are teams that may do their stand-ups in the morning and they walk together. I know within the talent and inclusion team, we do walks and talks on Wednesdays. There's exercise happening. So there are pockets of things that we're implementing throughout the organization to stand up self-care. And we're asking leaders to lead by example, right? So I'm checking in to see if employees do need a break, right? And so some feel like they don't want to raise their hand and say, I'm kind of burnt out or stressed or just need a day. So it's checking in to just see what they each individually need, and showing that we're there to support them however they need it.
Sarah, you're dealing with this both within and outside of the organization since you're working with so many different companies. So what are the things that are most top of mind in terms of, stress or work-life balance that are coming up?
So Annalisa hit the nail on the head talking about the need for more vulnerability in the workplace. I think never before have we seen our personal and professional lives, Annalisa's children were on the Zoom before we started the call. I was ushering my family. We're in a hotel room right now, but I threw my partner out with our baby, an 8-year-old, and was like, go for a walk. There are new normals that are happening that are out of our control. And so for employees, it's adding a ton of stress. And if they don't have the opportunity, or if there isn't a safe space created for them to have these conversations, it can be incredibly difficult to raise your hand. We've had employees who've been impacted by COVID. We've had employees whose, like in my case, partners have lost their jobs completely. Mine fortunately just had to take a pay cut, but everyone's being impacted in different ways. And then what's happening around racial injustice, I think people are finally starting to open their eyes and understand that for Black people in the workplace, there is not space for them typically to bring their whole selves to work. And it's far time, thank goodness that this is happening and people are starting to facilitate these conversations. I think that's one of the things that I'm most proud of the work that we've been doing recently, is really leaning into having these candid conversations. We've brought a group of our Black pros together to facilitate these with our clients and publicly, so that people do have the opportunity to express how they're feeling. And so I think, first and foremost, you have to be able to allow people to have the difficult conversations. I mean, that is literally all we do at Bravely, is coach people around how to go forward, or to figure out like an action plan for them to take care of themselves. To Alex's point, I have not done what Alex has done in terms of exercising and losing weight, just so everyone knows. I envy you, Alex. I'll reach out to get some tips from you. But these are all the things that people need support on right now. Having these difficult conversations, being able to figure out, how do I survive, forget about thriving, if you have children right now, and it's also, if you don't have children and you're sheltering at home by yourself, like these are two different circumstances, both incredibly stressful, but it feels like there is not a solution and you feel really guilty about not performing. And so how do you have a conversation with your boss if they're not the one standing up and saying, come to me? So first and foremost, managers have to be coached and take responsibility for leading their teams and creating the safe space. And then you also have to support your employees and help them, figure out how to express that things are not going well for them, or that they're not feeling that their performance is where it should be, for example. And so that's, literally something that I'm dealing with every single day with all of our clients' employees, and then with my own team. They're all going through their own set of personal circumstances, and I make it a point to know exactly what each of them is going through, because, someone who's having to cancel their wedding is very different than someone who's about to have a new baby, which are both two circumstances on my team. My co-founder's husband is an emergency room doctor in New York City. Like, these are so different, and they require different levels of support and solutions. And if you are not asking your employees those questions, if you have Black employees on your team and you haven't reached out to them and asked them directly, what's going on with you? How can I help you? Talk to me about what your experience is. You are missing the mark.
Katasha, I know you want to add on to that, so go ahead.
Yes, I want to add on to two things. So in terms of what employees are experiencing, I would encourage colleagues, managers to just look for cues that show that this isn't typical behavior. It could be something as little as showing up 5 minutes late to a meeting where the person was always on time, even when you had to go through an elevator bank and was very planful. It could be, someone turning in a report later than expected, right? And so sometimes you want to give, the space for that, but space with silence, right, is no good. And so there's a way to check in And then you'll be surprised what they'll kind of reveal, what their vulnerabilities are, what their stressors are, and then that's the way you can support them. So I think a lot of what Sarah is saying is like, take it to a personal level, like imagine yourself in their shoes. And for the Black kind of employee experience, you know, I think it's a balance, right? It's you want to show that you're supportive and you want to respect kind of where they are and how they're processing things. So you have, you know, I think this is a moment that we don't want to just be a moment, right? So if you're going to show up, it's how do you show up continuously, one, and then two, you know, people of color and specifically Black employees, some may be experiencing fatigue because you have friends, you have associates, you have managers, you have everyone checking in on them, and where they may have thought about some of these things personally or with their families or with folks they trust, it's now so much exposure into their lives. And so you just want to make sure that they're willing and ready to go there with you, and that you as the receiver are really ready for the truth, right, of their experience, and to create the space for that.
Yeah, that's definitely an important point to make. Thank you for saying that. I want to talk about collaboration, and we always talk about, you know, innovation having, you know, cross-functional aspect to it. You know, more innovation comes when people connect with each other. Yet we're in this time of unprecedented isolation. So this is for Alex and Annalisa and Anna specifically. How do your respective departments make that leap over to work with others in order to maintain the level of engagement and to check in on health and well-being? Because it's obviously everyone's job. So Alex, why don't you start?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have the magic sort of the silver bullet on this one, but I would say you've got to, you know, and a lot of what has been said so far resonates with me, because I think you just have to be very creative and innovative during this time. I'll give you an example of something that has worried me recently, and I think, you know, prevents collaboration, actually, if anything, is that, you know, we have gone through a period of time where some of our employees, and I think it's mentioned, have gone on to reduced hours, right? Because there's not necessarily been as much utilization for their work, but that puts additional pressure on their colleagues. And also, we also still have certain groups that are overutilized. And so unless you add incremental resources in those groups, what I've noticed is, what I worry about is that collaboration within a team can turn into tension, right? So I think one of the places I've seen my job being is really getting an understanding of where that's happening and influencing the discussion, right? So I think when I said before, you can't have a cookie cutter sort of approach to this. So yes, globally, by and large, we have pretty much a headcount freeze. But if we have employees that are telling you time and time again, we're burning out, we're looking at their utilization and they're like at 150% utilized, we need to do something about it, right? So it's actually wrapping our arms around those situations and being part of it. The other thing I want to say is I've really, since I've come into the organization, tried to really get around the organization and dig into it and kind of highlight that we're kind of going through a culture change. Anna mentioned it earlier as well, that at Pinterest, I think sounds like they have a similar culture to us, where we have a very nice culture. I think we struggle with the tougher conversations sometimes. So I'm trying to infuse this sort of this mantra of getting comfortable being uncomfortable. And I will tell you, typically as an organization, what I've heard is historically is we probably wouldn't have gone out with internal and external communications about things happening like Black Lives Matter. But I think it was clear that silence is complicit, right? And you want to be on the right side of history with this as well. And so what I'm noticing is now we're talking about creating a global D&I roundtable, not just to talk, but actually for action to come from it. So my hope is that this is actually going to lead to more collaboration globally within our communities, have an understanding what's happening, and not just talk, but actually walk the talk. And for me, I'm the cynical HR person here. I don't know if anyone else is. But I'm also the person who normally says, well, I hope this goes beyond the news cycle. And this time around, it does feel different. So I hope that's the case.
Anna?
Yeah, I can jump in. So there's so many things we could talk about as it relates to collaboration. I'm gonna focus on 3 things. So I think first, just from like the pure mechanics of the way that we're working today, which is very different from how we were working before COVID, I think we've learned time and time again that you need to build so much more structure in an all remote environment to sort of replace things that might have otherwise happened organically. And so at Pinterest, we've taken a real hard look at how meetings happen, how we make sure that there are the right touch points between teams, how we're tracking projects, just really doubling down on kind of the hygiene of how work happens, because that helps take off the table situations where things are unclear and people make up narratives that might not be accurate or productive or positive. So I think the more structure and clearer norms for how to make work happen remotely has been critical. Another one has been, we have onboarded a number of new hires since the beginning of the year. People are working together who really never met in person. And so we've realized that we've had to do much more work up front to build trust before we sort of set teams free to collaborate. Because if you don't have trust, then you really don't have anything. And there have a number of different strategies that we've kind of leaned on there, but just on a really simple note, like get to know one another as humans. So we've established a kind of a really fun practice at Pinterest where we'll start or end meetings where everyone goes around and says one word that sort of encapsulates how they're doing, and then a few sentences to describe that. So just a few things like that that are very lightweight, but actually do make a big difference in creating opportunities for people to connect to one another throughout the day. And then I think the third one has been the more opportunities that we can remind one another that we all want the same thing. We share the same business goals. We have the same customer. We want the same thing and we have the same end goal. Reinforcing that has really helped situations where teams, kind of priorities might be misaligned. Teams feel like other teams that they rely on aren't coming through for them. If you go straight to what's broken, how do we fix it, you sort of miss an opportunity to start with like, what's the outcome that we all are looking for here? And then backing into it, through a more tactical conversation of how you get there. That's really, really helped us.
Back to Annalisa, talking about trust and vulnerability. How is that playing for you?
Absolutely. I think, a lot of what Anna said, I think really resonates with how our approach at General Motors has been. And since we're a silver lining Midwestern kind of place, right, we also share the sin of being too nice sometimes. We tend to see that there's a silver lining in this pressure cooker, because it allows us to first recognize that things are uncomfortable, maybe things that we were doing before wasn't working fully to our advantage, and how can we use this opportunity to glow up as quickly as possible. And when I think about collaboration and when I think about bringing our true and authentic self to work, if we really think about the vulnerability that requires, so many people got into the role of being manager because they could manage work, not necessarily because they could manage people. And so if now I'm asking this manager to come to the table in a true, authentic way with good listening skills, with a good team relationship, and ask this person to take their armor off and take off the segmentation that they've had in their lives that allows them to be John Doe business person who now is John Doe listener and counselor. Not only are these very different skills, but this can bring up some dissonance. This can bring up some discomfort. So one of the gifts, honestly, in moving to a remote work environment like this is that sometimes it could be more comfortable to have a phone call with someone when conversations are a little hard, because it's one more emotional piece that they don't necessarily have to interpret, but that they're listening. They're not getting distracted by everything else, and that they're listening. And so what I think is occurring, at least in some of the data that we're seeing, is that there's actually potentially an advantage in two areas. One, which would be collaboration, because both in HR and PR, I think we over-index on extroverts, which leaves introverts behind. And so when you're in a room with someone like me who likes to talk, it's very difficult to get in edgewise, and it's not because I'm not a good listener, it's just because I'm loud and I'm Italian, right? So in this case, we've got a sidebar conversation going on in the chat. There are other ways. We're giving more pause on conference calls to allow for dutiful participation. Our listening skills are going up. And honestly, I think that's why so many people are exhausted, is because they've never really had to listen this hard. They're so used to talking. And if you think about that from an idea generation perspective and bringing equity to ideas, this could bring marginalized voices up on par with other who have more power in the room. When you neutralize that and it's just voices or screen, and it's not the other interstitial dynamics or the conversation that happens in the hallway that derails the positive conversation you just had in the conference room, this actually could do more, in my opinion, for younger employees, for Black participants, for women, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I tend to see that on my team, to be honest, that if you neutralize the playing field by allowing us all to participate in one forum at one time without all the other power structures happening around you, I'm seeing better ideas, more participation. Is it harder? Yes, but I think, in my opinion, it's harder because it's forcing people who aren't naturally good listeners to listen and to pause and to honor. And I think that that is a skill that will take some time. And I honestly think that's kind of why people are showing the sign that it's not the only reason, certainly not. But I do think it's an attributable reason, but could have tremendous, tremendous offset positivity relative to quality of ideas, bringing new diverse perspectives into view, and giving people who normally would not have spoken up the opportunity to speak up and for us to listen. So I'm not sure if the other panelists are observing things within their areas, but that's one of the things that I am noticing from small group meetings, even onto large group meetings. People that would have never talked before are now raising really, really good ideas.
I want to address that a little bit more deeply, especially in terms of bringing your whole self to work and covering. And I think that we have this moment, this opportunity, if you will, where so much of ourselves is now on display. You can see everybody's home, everybody's kids and whatever. But I think that there is still a measure of reserve with people. You know, it's natural. You've got to keep something to yourself. But when it comes to health and well-being, which is what we're here to talk about, that can potentially cause burnout because people aren't really comfortable saying, yes, I'm tired. Yes, I can't do this particular project. You know, where do I have to go? I'm going to be here for 10 hours. So Allison, can you speak to how you can get to a deeper level of conversation? Yes, it's about trust, but what kinds of things do you ask to make sure that the person is saying that they're fine and they really are?
So a lot of that, I think, is around listening. So the questions that I'm asking my team, and from day to day, it's very different. And what we see is, on the superficial level, tell me about what's on your plate. And I think just sitting back and listening, and then following it with, how is that working with your life? And so these are questions that we might not have had in the office because we were just on the go. But literally, when we have our huddles, we're looking at one another, and you can see when someone's in a space where they need to talk. So it's paying attention in that moment. I had one employee say, why do we have to talk so much? And so in listening to that, it was more around, so tell me more. She's like, it's tiring. What do you want to be different? And people will tell you what they want most times. And so the answer to that, I'd love to share it. And it was like, okay, with these conversations, I want this place to be different for African Americans. At the end of all of these conversations, I want to hear a commitment that our culture will be different for African Americans. That would have never happened 3 months ago. So I think by listening and by paying attention to the cues that you get, whether it's what Annalisa talked about, the silence for a minute, and probing. And as a manager, as a leader, not being afraid of what you're going to hear, because you can manage. We know we can manage what we hear. So it's on us to ask the questions that allow for the response and listening to it.
I'd love to add to that. And I think at the individual level, those questions are so critical. And the more specific, the better. One other thing that has really helped sort of surface feelings of burnout and helped people feel safe asking for the help that they need is at Pinterest. We actually ran sort of an anti-burnout campaign for the month of April, I think it was. And the way that we structured that was every week we had what we called a pintention. And it was a very specific intention. The first one was really figuring out what was a priority and what was not. The second one was around setting personal boundaries. We had a week where we focused on deepening personal connections. Every week we focused on one thing that has been proven to help address burnout. And as a company, that gave people permission. Hey, this week we're talking about setting boundaries. Everyone has to set specific personal boundaries, share them with their teams, and respect the boundaries that others within our teams set. And we also had a significant amount of kind of leadership role modeling. So we had various senior leaders send little videos out to the company explaining how they were honoring that pintention of the week. And it just really helped get everyone on the same playing field and give one another the same permission to take meaningful action in favor of their own wellness. So wanted to kind of share that because it's something that people still reference months later, you know, in the spirit of pintentions, I'm setting this boundary. So it's been great to see that that sort of lived on.
Lydia, can I add to this as well? So one of my mantras in life and the way that I manage my team is leading with empathy and gratitude. So I've made it a point in particular during this period to, during every team meeting, tell my team thank you for everything they're doing, because I recognize that we are a small and mighty team and they're doing more with less right now. And then from an empathy standpoint, and I'm hoping my direct report, if she's listening to this, doesn't kill me for saying this, but I think it goes back to the listening. There's personal dynamics and personal lives at play as a result of COVID. So I have an employee on my team that sits in Brazil and she's marrying somebody in Italy and both of their borders are closed right now. So she's planning on moving, but she asked, can she stay with the company longer until the borders reopen? And I said, absolutely, right? Because she's getting caught in the crossfires of all of this, right? And that's where the empathy comes in. She's helping us by staying with the company longer. So I want to also extend that courtesy, right, in the right way as well. And the other thing is I'm sure everyone else does this, I'm constantly asking my team about what their capacity looks like, right? And if somebody does have, gaps in capacity, then how can they help somebody else on the team, right? I always go into every interview when I interview somebody from my team that we are not a team of prima donnas, we are not a team of egos. And if that's who you are, then you definitely won't be successful on this team. So I think those are measures I've doubled down on during this period.
Mm-hmm. I just want to add that people and talent and HR teams right now, it feels from the conversations that I've been having with these leaders, they are tasked with sort of solving the world's problems right now. And it's incredibly difficult to be in this role. So I just want to thank all of you for the work that you're doing, number one. But it's impossible to support employees. I think most of them feel it's impossible to support employees right now at the level that they want to. And so I think that is why it's incredibly important for people leaders, business leaders to reassess what they're investing in terms of support for their employees. Because it's, this has always been one facet of Bravely that is finally getting a light shown on it, which is the emotional support that our coaches provide. So it's the combination of, yes, you're going to get the action planning and the tactical guidance around how to move forward, have better conversations, manage your team. But then you also have someone listening to you and giving you the support you need to make the next step, right? And so there's a lot of talk about wellness and mental health. And, for anyone on the call, I'm sure you often are the ones tasked with going and making the business case for these investments. But right now, it's really the time to take a look at, none of us are paying for snacks anymore for the most part. So where can that money be reallocated to support the wellness of our employees? Because without it, they are going to burn out. Without the safe spaces, they are going to burn out. And we as leaders need to, one, take the lead and be vulnerable and model the behavior that we want to see in our own teams, but then also show them, this is what we're going to do for you.
I'm so glad you said that, because it's going to segue into another question that I had, which is actually from the audience. But before we turn it over to the audience, because we are at the top of the hour, I'm going to ask Nick to come back on and do our station ID again.
Sure. Thanks so much for everyone that's participating in the Burnout Factor, and especially to our sponsors, Bravely and EasyExitInterview.com. At this time, we're turning over to questions from the audience, and you can hit the Q&A button that's at the bottom of your Zoom screen right now. And Lydia will start going through those now. Lydia?
Thank you. So yes, talking about investments, one of our attendees asked, some of our businesses are experiencing fairly critical economic downturns right now. As leaders, how do you recommend we balance the need to drive business forward with employee need to have flexibility and take time for self-care? And I'm sure that any of you can answer, so feel free. Who wants to jump in first?
This is Annalisa. I think relative to General Motors, it's no secret that our manufacturing production was shut down through the global impact of COVID. But even in the actions that were taken relative to some temporary layoffs, and many of us took pay cuts, I think the investment that you make in your talent is one that has dividends throughout and should be the highest priority, because without that investment into your talent, you cannot get the output, especially during a time when, if you're looking at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, no one feels safe right now. So if there's even a way to have a conversation that is honest, that says, I don't know when we can get back to normal levels of pay, but I honor you, I honor your contribution, and you are valuable to me. I think that those are really authentic ways to help mitigate that gap between the pay that they deserve because they're working 3 to 4 hours more per day in harder conditions under psychological and actual acute stress. This is hazard pay type of work done at less. And I think the more we can do to say, I honor the work that you're doing, and I know that this is hard, and I may not have the answers now, but I'm so grateful that you're here. I think, at least from my personal experience with my team and what we are asking our leaders to say and do, just that personal investment right now to mitigate that gap. And I think the reality is coming soon that as more employers now make their jobs non-work based, right? We can work from anywhere. Well, the competition for talent's going to get high real soon. So I think there's an interim step right now where everyone's regaining their balance. But in my opinion, the next step here is now you're seeing many desirable companies making their new recs work from anywhere at premium prices. So there really needs to be a recognition that there are some things that aren't monetary compensation and that there's other reasons why someone is working for you, and double down in those other areas. Otherwise, there's going to be a talent drain.
I think I'll just add to that, that I think it's a balancing act because we've rolled out some global principles around taking time off, right? Which of course that helps the bottom line of the company because we don't want to obviously reduce our workforce, right? And part of the way of doing that or avoiding having to reduce the workforce is creating flexibility, right? And giving people those opportunities to take time off as well. And things like a dependent care leave policy, because we know people have, people in their lives who are sort of elderly or in high risk groups that they need to take care of, right? So we want to create that. But I think the other thing to keep in mind is also there's certain parts of your workforce that are going to drive you out of recession, right? So, is this necessarily the right time to be reducing hours for your business development folks? Probably not, right? So you also have to be asking questions like that and making sure, again, I know I feel like a broken record saying cookie cutter, but you need to make sure you're not sort of shooting yourself in the foot as you're also creating flexibility.
If no one else wants to chime in, I want to move to another question that I think is really important. This one's from Lynn, and she says that our Black employees are exhausted. Everyone is asking them questions. They didn't want to be the experts on anything, and now all of a sudden they feel like they have to be, and they feel almost guilty that their Black experience hasn't been bad, or they feel angry that their Black experience has been awful. So do you have any suggestions for our Black employees? Does anyone want to take that one first?
I can take that one. So I'll have suggestions for our Black employees and for allyship with those Black employees. And I would say, we talked earlier about boundaries, right? And so it's recognizing what your personal boundaries are and not being afraid to communicate those boundaries in a respectful way. So if you're exhausted, say you're exhausted. If you have employee resource groups or affinity groups, those are great ways to kind of funnel what your thoughts are. They have in many ways been advocates for many organizations or speaking on behalf of the groups that they support. And so some things that leaders may hear are, Black employees are tired of being talked to and here's what they need, right? And so you may feel safer saying that through a group than as an individual. And then as for allyship, it's, I can't stress this enough, but like we did this exercise, like I mentioned, we did a session on misconceptions or, perceptions of Black males. And folks had to do a word cloud exercise that simply, you say what you think of, right? It's anonymous, but when you think of a Black male. And so we had all types of folks in that session, Black employees, other people of color, non-people of color. And, people are still, they're shocked, like when they see what they think of, and it's non-threatening because you're saying what you think others think of Black employees. And then we say, now imagine if you're walking in the room and things that came up were dangerous or Black males, dangerous, shifty, can't be trusted, etc. Right? And they showed these polls from hundreds of places, right? So, think about that Black experience, knowing that they may be aware of those things or that Black male or Black woman, what perceptions are. And every time they walk in the room or every time they're in some type of situation or engagement with you, that's what they're walking in with, that experience. And it's having some compassion about how that might feel. So, my message is twofold, but for Black employees specifically, be authentic, state your boundaries, and voice your concerns in ways that feel safe to you.
I would love to just add that over the course of the last couple of weeks, I have learned so much. And again, I mentioned that we've been holding these conversations with some of our Black coaches, and they have just, even though I live with a Black man, I still carry my own bias. I also have just not understood clearly the things that the person that asked this question brought up around the exhaustion and the responsibility that Black people often feel around educating others. And I'm just so grateful that I now understand that from a different perspective, to make sure that I'm not asking that of my friends, my employees. And I just think that, you know, for anyone on this call, like really starting to understand you know, I would never say that there's a wrong way to do it, because I think a lot of times, especially for white people, we err on the side of caution and then we don't actually take action, and now is not the time to do that. But it is really important to educate ourselves so that we do not make our Black employees the ones responsible. And so I really appreciate that being brought up. And one of the things that we've also been doing with clients is hosting these small inclusion circles where we're bringing together, we started with bringing together their Black employees and having one of our coaches hold this session so that they truly do have a safe space. It's confidential. Nothing that they share is going to get elevated outside of that Zoom call. And they're able to really talk about their personal experience with their colleagues. And often they're coming back and saying to us, I've never had the opportunity to do this. We don't, you know, talk to each other after work or in the hallway about this. And now for the first time ever, I'm having a conversation with a Black colleague about my experience. And so I would encourage anyone to figure out a way to facilitate this inside the walls of your own company. And what's also emerged from these conversations are really actionable ways that the companies can make an impact and improve things for their Black employees. So it all starts with that safe conversation.
So I'd like to add to that. Go ahead, Alex.
Sorry. Sorry, Allison. No, I was just going to add, Sarah's point really resonated with me because I feel like I've very much been in learning and education mode myself the last couple of weeks. So, you know, as a gay man, for example, I think about allyship a lot from an LGBTQ standpoint, but I've never really been thinking about it as far as allyship to the Black community. So it's really kind of made me think in a way that I haven't before. And the other thing I think it's really helped, going to Sarah's point, is I also realized like I have oversight for an entire region, which is Latin America as well as North America. And it's also reminded me like the issues that we face in Latin America is so different from North America. And I need to make sure that we don't become too US centric. And one of the things that we notice in Latin America that's a big problem, it's not necessarily around race, as it is much about nationality. So one of the things we're actually planning on doing is creating a video about nationality issues in Latin America and sharing that globally. So it provides more education around that. So I think it's also kind of woken me up to, hey, these are things that I need to hold myself accountable to as well, you know, for the betterment of the organization.
Go ahead, Allison.
So, and this is in line with what Katasha was saying. I think I know from an African American perspective, many times when you're asked, tell me, or what can I do, it's an expectation to speak on behalf of the entire race. And I think it's very important as you're reaching out to friends, colleagues, others in your organization to focus in on the individual and not have an expectation for that person to be able to solve and give you the answer for how to deal with everything as it relates to race. I think it's incumbent for an ally to take the time to learn, to study history, to understand the impacts of systemic racism over the years and how that plays out into today. And that gives a lot of understanding around an experience or experiences of many African Americans. And to think about how you can, as an ally, how you can contribute to it not remaining the same as it is in the past. So it's shared responsibility. And I think that responsibility is just like with anything you want to do to get better at, you learn and you try. And so it's not oftentimes we get the answer handed to us on a platter. And oftentimes as an African American, that's how it's experienced. we've had 400 years of oppression and racism. And today I'm expected to give you the answer for how to solve. And we as a society haven't figured that out. So just being mindful of not putting that burden for the answer to just be handed over from your Black colleagues.
Thank you. We have three fairly similar questions about balance. One is about supporting the team is taking up so much time that I'm falling behind in other areas of my job. Another one is saying that as a manager, they're having to be cautious to get their staff to share, but not triggering and opening wounds. And then still another is saying, you know, I have to walk a thin line because I feel like I'm becoming a counselor rather than an HR professional, Alex, to your point about being the chief wellness officer. So who can speak to riding this balance? And, you know, this other person said you have to be careful that you might get yourself into a sticky situation or even a lawsuit. So yes, we are having these challenging conversations. How do you balance the amount of work you have to do with not triggering and being mindful?
I'll start. So I think, you know, where we are right now, it's a very complex moment for society, right? And from the pandemic to, you know, murders of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, to looking at globally how the Black experience is playing out and people speaking up globally. You know, so we've been encouraging authentic moments. You know, you can have a disclaimer, you know, that says, I don't know it all. I am not, you know, trying to offend you, you know, or my team. Like, I'm looking for ways to support you, but I would encourage more authentic moments. And you know, if you're worried about legal implications, feel free to check in with your legal teams and the organizations that you work in. But for the most part, we're all human. You know, everyone is experiencing tremendous levels of emotion. And I think it's more than appropriate to show up and acknowledge that.
I want to also build upon what Katasha is saying, because I think when you partner that vulnerability with the requisite emotional intelligence and respect, and this is why I think it's so important that you start at a manager one-to-one level in a small circle of your trusted employees, and you start to show and say, I don't have all the answers, but I care about you and I want to get to the right place together. How do I build that with you? That's a much different thing than saying, you know, tell me your feelings on Black Lives Matter right now. And I think that is the shift. That is the shift that I think so many of us are identifying, that is part of bringing our humanity, our true selves to work, that hasn't necessarily been coached yet or talked about, or there's true precedent. But so much of that is having grace and vulnerability and trust. And I think that is something that you cultivate over time. And now we're asking people to have that with immediate effect in virtual tool environments where it's hard to maybe build that trust. So I definitely identify with what people are saying, but I also think the demand right now to have that authentic conversation, to have that human moment, has never been higher. And we're even seeing it from, you know, Mary Barra said that she wants General Motors to be the most inclusive company in the world. We're a tremendously large company with massive intersections. And right now we're focused on one very immediate need, which is addressing Black lives and helping in every single way that we can to make Black lives better, both in GM and outside. But the near term after that, there's a domino effect of all the intersectionality that needs to be recognized and celebrated, and create a space for them to bring their true selves to work in a way that we've never done before. And I think a lot of that just comes down to grace and to be that vulnerable self. But that's not, I don't think that's easy for most, to be honest. Certainly not from the perspective that I see with the employees that we coach. Our demographics on the whole are conservative traditionalists. And this is not a space where you expect a pivot and a culture change and skill set overnight on some of the hardest conversations of our time. So I think that also needs to be said too, that we need to honor one another in the journey together. Otherwise, you won't get to that level of truthfulness and authenticity for either party, to have a space where they feel that they can say, I may not know, but I care about you, you know?
Annalisa, if I could add, I would also encourage for those that are concerned and don't know quite how to start, you know, some of the programs that everyone's talked about today that you're offering to employees on a global level, or how you manage your meetings, right? So I have a daily stand-up with my team as well, and we may change how we start it. So this week we're all sharing one word that describes how we're feeling, right? So it kind of equalizes things, and you can pick up on certain things and then follow up. So it gives you like a foundation from which to start. Or we do, you know, no meeting Fridays for some departments that can allow that. So that kind of equalizes the playing field. And if you are apprehensive, or the employee is apprehensive about saying, I need some time, it won't do them any good to say they're out of the office, but they still kind of need to check their emails because their whole team is working. So if you can encourage those spaces, and as leaders, put systems and processes in place that hold everyone up, you'll get more vulnerability and more sharing, and more thoughtful kind of one-on-one connections as a result, I believe.
I couldn't agree more. I agree completely with what you said.
Yeah. I love everything that was just said. And just one quick thing to add is kind of to the point of are we becoming too much like counselors? I would really reframe that and say, we are in the process of getting the information that we need to become change agents. And there's so much mistrust of HR. There's so much bad stuff happening in companies. And I think, you know, there are a multitude of reasons for that, but a lot of it is because the struggle of what it's like to be an employee of these companies is not being vocalized, and it's not reaching the ears of the people who actually have the power to make changes. And so I would encourage kind of all of us as HR professionals to really focus our conversations on, you know, really pushing yourself to take the information that you hear and drive real action in the form of policies, processes, employee programs, rather than focusing so much on like being a therapist for the individual. But part of the process should be making sure that you have someone to go to, for that employee to go to when they do need to talk to a therapist, whether it's your EAP or, you know, we work with Lyra, as well as kind of on the Bravely side, we've gotten so much great feedback from our employees on the conversations they have with the coaches at Bravely. So just kind of wanted to add that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're bringing up a really good point about, again, it's this, there's always this, I would almost call it tension with HR, because a lot of, you know, my career started in HR, most of my closest friends, because when you start your career somewhere, they become friends for life. They're all now leading people teams. And it's incredibly challenging to overcome what Anna's talking about, which is, you know, can you trust HR? But then HR is also tasked with like solving all of the employee relations issues, or, you know, supporting employees. Which is literally one of the reasons that I founded Bravely, is because I really do believe that HR teams have the best intent, but they're just set up to sometimes not be able to accomplish the things that they want to. And so if you're able to figure out what the resources are, if it's EAPs, if it's mental health, if it's Bravely, you know, whatever those resources are to support you as people leaders so that you can get into all those nooks and crannies, like I cannot stress it enough, like right now is the time. I keep saying that this is an opportunity for us to completely reframe, rejigger, create new strategies around how we engage our employees, support them, and change our cultures, really. I mean, there's a need if there's not, like, we've gone through the pandemic, we've gone through the economic crisis, but the murder of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, those events together collectively, there is a calling that is happening right now for people leaders, for them to really take the necessary steps to transform our cultures.
The one thing I would add to that, though, is part of the reason I joined Control Risks and what I've seen in the last almost 12 months being there is that HR has been viewed as a necessary function, but not always necessarily as an add value function. And that's part of what my plight has been to change that. And I honestly think if you come in there and you sort of set the right agenda, then it's very much doable. And it can be, I think some people perceive HR as a them versus us mentality. And I've always seen myself as an extension of the business. So I also think it's how you position yourself coming in and learning the business. So I think what people are right, like we shouldn't be there just to be counselors and to do wellness, but really to understand the business and to push it, because once you understand it, then you build your credibility as well. So I think that's an important piece. Like I always say when I look to join any organization, it's about how can I add value, right? And I think that's what we need to be thinking about as we go through this era right now as well.
There are so many questions. We are obviously not going to have time to get to them all. In fact, I just want to take one more that we can do a lightning round with because it's a future-focused question. How do you anticipate the way we support our employees to change as we look to the long-term nature of this? It was one thing to do 3 to 5 months, but what does it look like when we're talking about 10, 12, or 15 months? So I'd like you all to, as I said, lightning round. So just give me your take. Where do you see this all going in the coming year?
I can start quickly. I think there's going to be a renewed focus on inclusion. I think a lot of companies have discounted their D&I budgets, and now they're starting to realize that it's going to be the most important thing for them to invest in as we work remotely and people are really struggling with feeling included at work.
I would agree with that. I'd add, you're going to probably see less necessary business travel because we've noticed how we can use technology in lieu of traveling somewhere. So I think we're going to look at business travel in a different way. I also think office cultures are going to look different for where they still exist. And especially, I think there's going to be a bit of fear at the beginning as people return to the workplace when they've got to think about wearing a mask or PPE or things like that. So ongoing sort of interventions to making sure people feel comfortable about returning to the workplace.
Shift in support, Allison?
I would say new norms around people and place. And wherever you are, I think companies are going to be reevaluating their values, their cultural behaviors, and that will equal new norms.
Katasha?
I agree with everything said. It's for the New York Times, for instance, we're 160 years old, right? And so we have a deep, long culture. And while we stand up coverage around the world, we are not, you know, like an impenetrable force, right? Like we need to hold the mirror up to ourselves. And I would say for organizations around the world, it's time to really take a look at cultures and embrace that. From ways of working, you know, we've moved a newsroom, right, to almost complete remote ways of working, and it's challenging the norm, right, and determining what's right, what the new normal should be.
I definitely see the trend impacting in 2 ways. One, which is recognizing that COVID and the current conversations about inequity really impact women differently than any other demographic, and women have had to withhold both holding, you know, elder care, child care, and every other form of care for the most part. The studies all confirm this. And I think that it will be called upon employers to find a way to give equity in broadband access and equity in terms of office allocation to make work from home viable, because for some, you know, we're working out of spare bedrooms and putting, you know, Harry Potter books to make computers at eye level. And that only works for a few months at a time. And I definitely think the impact to women is probably larger than the other side. And so if we are to make this viable, I definitely think this is a D&I issue. And I think that we need to address, providing resources like broadband or equipment to make this not incumbent on the employee to make this work from home life work.
Alex, you're gonna either love or hate me for using your favorite word today, but I would say fewer cookie cutter solutions and even less of a discussion of best practices. Because I think kind of simply stopping once you feel like you've hit the best practice has held so many companies back. And I think we're gonna see more and more HR teams really, really taking the time to get to know their communities and designing innovative programs and policies and solutions that actually get to the core needs of their communities and really build companies that are going to set everyone up to thrive and not just a subset of people.
Thank you. So I'll invite Nick in the last seconds we have here.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Lydia. Thanks to all of these great speakers. That was a wonderful conversation. And thanks especially to Bravely and EasyExitInterview.com for participating today, and for everyone that's attended. Thank you. If you'd like to join us for more virtual events, you can head to our website. That's fromday1.co, FROMDAYONE.co, and check out more of our upcoming webinars. The next one's up on Thursday, this Thursday, June 25th, Talent Outlook 2020, defining the new contours of the labor market. And then after a quick break for the week of 4th of July, we're back Thursday, July 9th for Pay with a Shared Purpose, providing employees with the financial benefits that will help them get ahead. This has been From Day One. Thanks again.